Chivenge. I work for the African Plant Nutrition Institute, APNI, and today I'm going to talk about opportunities and challenges for sub-Saharan Africa in the context of nutrient management. So just to give you a brief background of what we do at APNI, we are a non-profit organization that was formed in 2019 to conduct research on crop nutrition. We have our headquarters in Bengueria, Morocco, and that is where I am based. We also have another office in Setat, also in Morocco, and this office covers our work in North Africa. We have an office in Yamoussoukro, Ivory Coast, which covers our work in West Africa. And then we have an office in Nairobi, Kenya, which covers our research in East and Southern Africa. So in collaboration with African and global partners, we pursue our mission, which is enhanced plant nutrition for a resilient and food secure Africa. Our vision is that we have prosperous African farmers sustainably managing crop nutrition to provide consumers with a secure supply of nutritious foods at a reasonable price. So to give you a brief outline of my presentation, I'll talk about challenges in sub-Saharan Africa, and this is mostly in the context of smallholder farming systems, which make up the bulk of the farmers that we have on the continent. And then I will talk about opportunities, and here I'll give some examples of some of the approaches that we have used. And then I have a brief talk on what the future prospects might be. So the African continent has challenges of food insecurity, and our population is increasing. In 2019, our population was about 1.4 billion people, which constituted about 17% of the world population. It is projected that this population will increase to 4.28 billion by 2100, and this will constitute about 41% of the world population. So clearly, there is need to increase food production in order to meet the demands of the growing population. But we have challenges. The productivity in Africa has remained low. This has been largely attributed to our soils having low plant nutrients and organic matter. And this has been caused mostly by low use of fertilizers. So on average, farmers use about 16 kilograms of nutrients per hectare per year. And this low use of nutrients, together with other challenges such as soil erosion, has resulted in land degradation, with 60% of our arable land being degraded. This is about 46 million hectares. We also have a challenge with yield gaps that are high. We have large yield gaps for most of the crops that we grow. So for most of the crops that we grow on the continent, the yield that is attained by the farmers is less than 50% of the attainable yield. We have crops such as millet having as low as 20% of the yield, of the attainable yield, being what the farmers are obtaining, and even groundnuts has less than 20%. The only crop that is doing a little better is wheat, which is sitting at about 50% of the attainable yield, and even then that is low compared to other world regions. So we have crop production challenges on the continent. So we need to produce more affordable and nutritious food in Africa, and we need to do this with adequate inputs and with less environmental load. So this means that we want to promote resource use efficiency. Food security has declined globally, but Africa lags behind. About 30% of sub-Saharan Africa experiences food shortages. So if we look at the figure at the top, it is showing crop production, here being a million tons per per year. And then here we have over time. As you can see, other world regions, food production is increasing. So this means that food insecurity is reducing, except for sub-Saharan Africa, which is this dark orange line, which, as you can see, it has increased, but not nearly as enough, and not nearly as high as in other world regions. So this food production has largely been attributed to low use of fertilizers. This figure at the bottom is showing fertilizer use in the different regions. As you can see from the key, as you increase the intensity of the color, you increase fertilizer use. What it shows is that in other regions, Americas, Europe, Asia, Australia, we have higher fertilizer use, whereas the African continent is much lighter, as you can see on this figure, except for countries such as South Africa, where fertilizer use is higher compared to other countries on the continent. So this low use of fertilizer has resulted in agriculture being more extensive and with expansion into new land, causing other challenges such as deforestation. And this low use of fertilizers elevates the risk for having non-responsive soils because the soils are nutrient depleted. So fertilizer use must increase if we want to increase production, particularly if we want to increase production in the same unit area without expanding into new land. So this extensive agriculture has resulted in carbon and diversity loss that is quite common in smallholder farming systems. So we need new technologies that increase yield and profit, that is to meet the immediate needs by the farmer with minimum environmental impact, which is for long-term sustainability. So these technologies need to take into consideration the wide spatial variability that we have on the smallholder farming systems. Here I'm showing a picture from a farm in Zimbabwe. So this is one field. As you can see, this crop was planted on the same day, the same variety, and the management was the same. You can see a better crop growth in other parts of the field, whereas in other parts, the growth is quite stunted. So this shows that smallholder production systems can vary within small distances. So low fertilizer use has been a key limiting factor to production. And as you can see from this picture, blanket fertilizer recommendations are inappropriate because you can over apply the fertilizer in other parts of the field, whereas in other parts you are under applying. So there's need to tailor the nutrient management or the fertilizer application to meet the different challenges that we have on the field. So we have this profound soil fertility variability, which is associated with the inherent, because some of the soils, the soil fertility depends on the parent material, but it also is influenced by management factors. So the historical management of the field will determine the fertility. And in these smallholder farming systems, there are many challenges that is associated with soil testing. So most of the farmers do not have access to soil testing facilities. So here I'm just showing the nuances of nutrient management, how they play out at the farm level. So this is within one farm. With this farm, we are showing intra-farm diversity. So this diversity is largely caused by management practices by the same farmer. So smallholder farmers tend to manage their home fields, those fields that are close to the homestead, better than those fields that are further away because they have less control with those outfields. What we see here are two pictures. Here is my colleague, Shani, and what it is showing is that we have a response to fertilizer in the home field, because this is already a fertile soil. We have about 2 tons per hectare. But when you combine fertilizer with manure, you increase the yield response to 3 tons per hectare. Whereas with the outfield, because it is degraded, there is no response to fertilizer application. So this soil needs other things to be addressed before the crops can respond to the fertilizers. So the addition of manure in the back here, manure and the fertilizer causes a response of 3 tons per hectare. So this shows the variability on the farm and how we need to take that into consideration when managing these soils. Here is another example from Western Kenya, which outlines the variability that we see within the farm and also across, so inter-farm diversity. What we see here is with this resource rich farmer, you see that the performance of the crop is much better. Of course, you have a gradient as you go down the slope, but the gradient is less pronounced compared to the neighbor who is resource poor. With this resource poor farmer, we find that as you go down the slope, the productivity declines. These differences are caused by different management practices. This farmer has historically managed their farm better than the resource poor farmer. And it is also possible that this rich farmer tends to have access to livestock or own livestock, which means that they do have some manure that can supplement the nutrient inputs. So from this, it shows that we need to manage our fields differently depending on what the challenges are. One of the concepts that can address that variability is what we call site-specific nutrient management, SSNM. So SSNM is a crop-based management approach, which is a set of principles, scientific principles for determining the optimum nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium fertilization needs for specific fields. And this was initially developed for rice, but has been extended to other crops such as wheat, maize, and cassava. So with this approach, we aim to supply the crop with the needed nutrients, and we aim to supply the crop with added nutrients as and when needed by the crop. So briefly to talk about this approach, first we establish the yield target so that we know that how much of the nutrients are needed to attain that target yield. So the target yield is determined by climate, and it is also determined by the germplasm, the variety. So that's what determines the potential yield, and then you can set the target yield for the different farmers. And then we also need to determine the indigenous nutrient supply so that we utilize effectively those nutrients that are existing in the soil. So this indigenous supply is what we have in the irrigation water where there is irrigation. It is what is in the crop residues where the crop residues are returned to the soil. It is also what is in the soil, the inherent fertility of the soil. It also takes into account the amount of manure that is used. So once we know the target yield and hence we know the needs of the nutrient needs of the crop, and then we also know what is in the soil, we can then determine the deficit between the total needs and the indigenous supply as our fertilizer needs for the crop. So just to give a brief historical perspective, SSNM was started based on some work that was done in Eastern Kenya, where they used the Quest model to calibrate the model for maize. So that work was then used to come up with this SSNM technology. It was developed for rice initially, and then so this was in Asia, and then the counterparts at Africa Rice in West Africa also started working on developing SSNM for smallholder farmers, smallholder rice farmers in West Africa. And then in the 2000s, we had the SSNM being evaluated for the different regions. And then during those years, there was also extension of SSNM into for other crops such as wheat and maize. And then over time, we started developing decision support tools that will aid the application of SSNM, because this is quite knowledge intensive. So the tools that were developed were like, some of them are Nutrient Manager for rice, which later became Rice Crop Manager, because it then incorporated some crop management practices into the tool. We have Nutrient Expert, which was developed initially in Asia, but then was extended to Africa. We have Rice Advice, which was developed for rice in West Africa, and then eventually in the late 2010s, we had SSNM being developed for cassava, and there are tools that are being developed for decision management. So here I will give some examples of the performance of SSNM in sub-Saharan Africa. So this is based on data that I found in the literature. I only managed to get 9 studies when we were writing this paper. So this represents a small number compared to the work that has been done in Asia. So this indicates that there is need for more research of SSNM in the region. What we are showing in these figures is the grain yield, the nitrogen use efficiency using partial factor productivity of nitrogen, and then profit based on gross return above fertilizer cost. Here we have blue being rice, and then orange being maize. We have 21 and 50% increase in yield over the farmer practice for rice and maize. And then when we compare with the state recommendation, we have about 14 and 17% increase in yield compared to the SSNM. Similarly, we increase the nitrogen use efficiency, both in rice and in maize, when we compare with the farmer practice, and the increase was greater for the farmer practice compared to the state recommendation, because this state recommendation represents a better management practice. But when we compare this state recommendation with the SSNM, we still see an increase, albeit smaller. Similarly, with our profit, we have greater profit with SSNM compared to the farmer practice and with the state recommendation. So this shows that site-specific nutrient management can potentially increase production, getting these triple wins for the farmers. For the work that was done in Nigeria, we see also triple wins with SSNM. Here they were using the tool Nutrient Expert for maize. What we see here is that, so this is yield, the cost of the fertilizer, and then the end use efficiency. What we see is that we have increases with maize yield increases with the Nutrient Expert. And then the RR represents a regional recommendation, which is our blanket but improved recommendation. And then ST represents the soil test-based recommendation. So the yield increase was a little smaller compared to the regional recommendation and the soil-based test. When we look at the cost, the regional recommendation and the soil test-based recommendations, they tend to have higher fertilizer cost. And as we can imagine, this means that the profit is much smaller compared to this SSNM-based approach. When we look at nitrogen use efficiency, we see that SSNM increases nitrogen use efficiency by about 30% compared with the farmer practice. It is much smaller with this regional recommendation and the soil test-based recommendation. In a study that we did looking at, it was a meta-analysis comparing the response on grain yield, total fertilizer cost, gross return, and gross return above fertilizer costs. We see that the adoption of SSNM increases yield. So here at the bottom, it's showing grain yield, and the one at the bottom here is showing rice, wheat, maize, and this is average across all the crops. As we can see, anything that is above this zero line is indicating an increase over the farmer practice. We have at least 10% increase in yield. And then the total fertilizer cost was quite variable, with wheat having a greater fertilizer cost with SSNM compared with the farmer practice. But when we look at the gross return, it actually has a positive gross return and also a positive gross return above fertilizer cost. And then this is achieved by using, on average, less nitrogen fertilizer. As you can see, for all the three crops, the fertilizer nitrogen rate is much lower than what the farmers are using. And most of this is influenced by the work that was done in Asia. Because of these 61 papers, only 8 were from Africa. And then the nitrogen rate is reduced, but we have increased N splits, which means that we have more doses of nitrogen fertilizer being applied at different times, and this likely increased together with the appropriate rate. We increased the nitrogen use efficiency, both using the agronomic nitrogen efficiency and the partial factor of productivity. If we look at the regional responses, what we see is that East Asia, where there is high use of fertilizer, the SSNM has less increases in yield compared to Southeast Asia, compared to South Asia. But when we look at end use efficiency, it is the opposite. So the benefit in South Asia is in increasing yield, whereas the increase in end use efficiency is smaller. And then in East Asia, where we have small benefits in terms of grain yield, we have large benefits in terms of end use efficiency. What this means is that the farmers in East Asia are likely using or over applying the nitrogen fertilizer. Similar story is found in rice, and here you see also Africa. We have larger increases in rice yield, but when it comes to end use efficiency, we see that the increase in end use efficiency is lower. So what we see is that in regions where there is already high fertilizer use, the benefit is derived more from increasing the efficiency of the nitrogen applied, whereas in regions where there is low fertilizer use, the benefits are obtained more from the increase in the yield. So in summary, yes, we have large yield gaps in Africa, and we also have high spatial variability, which means that we need tailored solutions to address that variability. We see triple wins with SSNM. We increase yield, we increase profit, we also increase nitrogen use efficiency. The increase in nitrogen use efficiency suggests that we have less losses to the environment. So this contributes to sustainability. We have different regional responses depending on the prevailing fertilizer use. SSNM tends to reduce nitrogen and phosphorus fertilizers, except where nutrients are mined, as in Africa. Moving on to the other approach, which is the 4R and stewardship. So this approach can contribute to sustainable intensification in smallholder farming systems. So the 4R approach aims to apply the right source of fertilizer for the different crops at the right rate, at the right place, and at the right time. And this approach contributes to sustainability, covering the 3 pillars: environment, economic, and social. So with sustainable intensification, it is essential that fertilizer use is increased so that we increase production within the same piece of land. But it also means we want balanced fertilizer application. So with balanced fertilizer application, it increases yield and resource use efficiency. So tailored recommendations for highly variable soils is important. And this also contributes to de-risking the fertilizer use. So smallholder farmers tend to have higher risk because of that variability that we find. So to reduce that risk, we then use these different approaches. So at APNI, we have a project that is on 4R solutions that is done in collaboration with different national partners in Ethiopia, Ghana, and Senegal. So this project integrates 4R nutrient stewardship. It aims to improve agricultural productivity and farm income. It also incorporates important gender and environmental resilience strategies. So this project targets to improve livelihoods of 80,000 smallholder farmers through the use of 4R nutrient stewardship. The activities are led by APNI, and what we are doing is we identify crop production constraints in the different geographies where we are working, and then we develop site-specific 4R-based recommendations, and then these are disseminated and scaled up and out to reach out more farmers. So from the work that we have done, so yield gains with 4Rs, on the project in Kenya, we see an average increase in yield for all the crops. So here with maize, the average farm yield is 2.2, but we have increased yield to 6 tons per hectare. Sorghum also increases from 0.6 to 2.5. Similarly, millet increases yield, beans, and soybeans. So clearly, the 4R nutrient stewardship has a promise to increase yields for the smallholder farmers. So going by in the different countries, Ethiopia, Ghana, we see that for different crops, we have an increase in yield across the different crops, and we can see that increase is from about 19% to about close to 200% in Ghana. So generally, you see that this larger percent is because the yields are generally low in Ghana. So the adoption of this improved nutrient management results in larger increases in the yield. So in summary, 4R nutrient stewardship provides opportunities to close the yield gaps that we find in the smallholder farming systems and address the variability because it is tailored to different sites. APNI is supporting on-farm innovations in field research across Africa, and this is contributing to sustainability. The other approach that we have used or evaluated is integrated soil fertility management. So this is because integrated soil fertility management is based on combining organic and mineral nutrient sources while taking into consideration the local conditions of the farmer and also using improved germplasm with good agronomic management practices. So here I just wanted to show the different organic resources that we have on farm. So Pauline and colleagues developed this decision support tool for organic N management. So they said with an organic resource that has more than 2.5% nitrogen, but less than 15% lignin and less than 4% polyphenol, it would be classified as class 1 organic resource, and they recommend to incorporate directly. And here is an example of class 1, which is Tithonia diversifolia. And then if this resource has more than 15% lignin or more than 4% polyphenol, is classified as class 2, intermediate quality. And the recommendation is to mix this with fertilizers because the nutrients will not meet the demands of the crop. If the resource is less than 2.5%, but less than 15% lignin, it is considered to be intermediate quality. And the recommendation is to mix this resource with fertilizer. An example of such crops are most of our crop residues, our cereal crop residues, maize, wheat, sorghum. And then if that resource has more than 15% lignin, it is low quality, class 4, and the recommendation is to supply on the surface for erosion control because incorporating that would cause immobilization of the applied nutrients. So in a meta-analysis that we conducted with close to 60 papers, we looked at the effects of combined application of organic and mineral nutrient sources on maize crop. And what we found that is that when organic resources are applied alone, you have about 60% increase in yield. But when it's fertilizer, you have more than 80% increase in the yield. So you have a higher response with fertilizer than with organic resource alone. But when the two are combined together, we have more than a doubling of the yields with this treatment. And then when we look at the agronomic efficiency, we see that we have higher agronomic nitrogen efficiency with nitrogen fertilizer compared with the organic resource. So it means that with combining the two, it reduces the efficiency compared to the nitrogen fertilizer, which becomes fairly similar to the organic resource. We separated the organic resources into the different qualities, quality classes, as I showed earlier, and we also separated them with texture. So this top one is showing all the texture classes. So we see that as we move from the low quality to the high quality, you tend to have greater yield responses. So yield increases are higher with high quality organic resources. There is a slight decline from class 2 compared to class 1, class 1 being the high quality, and that decision support 2 recommends that this organic resource is applied directly without combining with fertilizer. So it's possible that with fertilizer application, combining this high quality organic resource with fertilizer may lead to some losses and reduced response to the resources compared to class 2, which is recommended to mix with the fertilizer. But really, there are no differences between the two, as you can see, because there is an overlap of these confidence intervals. The story is the same for clay, for loam, and for sandy soil. But what differs is the magnitude of response. We have greater responses with sandy soils than with loam and with clay soils. If we also looked at soil organic carbon changes with this combined application, what we saw was that application of organic resources increases soil organic carbon by close to 20%. Whereas, so this is compared with the control, no input control. Whereas nitrogen fertilizer does not really change. There's a slight increase compared with the control, but there's no significant difference. When the organic resources and nitrogen fertilizers are combined, we see that there is an increase in soil organic carbon, about 10% increase in organic carbon. So it means that this ISFM can promote yield increases, but also promote soil organic carbon, which is an indicator of soil health. But when we compare the organic resource, the combined treatment with organic resource alone, we see that there's a decline in soil organic carbon. So the addition of there's sort of some trade-offs. The addition of nitrogen fertilizer with organic resource results in a lower response in terms of soil organic carbon buildup compared to when organic resources are added alone. So in summary, we have yield increases in the organic resource, less than fertilizers, less than the combined treatment. So the combined treatment has larger yield responses. We also see greater yield responses in sandy soils than in clay soils. So the addition of organic resource and organic resource with fertilizer led to greater soil organic carbon than the control. So this contributes to soil health improvement. So the future prospects that with the different approaches, we need to develop decision support tools. Some have been developed for the different approaches. For example, with the site-specific nutrient management, we have different digital tools that have been developed. But in the future, we can improve the functioning of these digital tools by linking them with geospatial tools to allow scaling. So with the digital tools, the geospatial tools, soil conditions and other data such as climate, it can help improve the precision and also for faster dissemination in across the different regions. We also need to develop and calibrate proxies to estimate indigenous nutrient supply. This is because we want to make sure that we tailor the nutrient management to suit the different conditions on the farm. And then we need to link with other service providers, such as the internet inputs, to allow the farmers in the remote areas to also access some of these services, the inputs that are needed, and also the coverage of the cellular networks. We also need to have access to reliable and timely weather forecasts to enable decision or to enable the farmers to make a decision and adjust the nutrient management accordingly. And then we also need to intentionally include micronutrients in our recommendations so that we also improve the human nutrition. I would like to end by advertising our conference, which will be conducted on 7 to 9 December. This is a conference on the African Conference on Precision Agriculture. This will be conducted in Nairobi, which will be our main site, and then we will have satellite sites in Egypt and Nigeria. So far, these two have been confirmed, with more to come. We are hoping that we will have a site here in South Africa as well. So this is the second conference, the second AFCPA conference. We had the first one in 2020, which was held in our site. Our main site was in Morocco, and this was during the pandemic. So this was all virtual, or rather mostly virtual. In other locations, there were some that came to meet in person. So this was conducted in 14 locations with more than 750 participants, representing 53 countries, 24 of them in Africa. So here is just showing where the sites, the satellite sites, were in the different countries. And this information can be found on our website, listed here. Thank you for your attention. And for those who would like to communicate with me, here is my email address. Thank you.